always telling my students to look out the window. Just find your inspiration by looking at where you are and observing what is yours to see. So that's what I'm doing this week. I'm taking myself on a little tour of my windows and then picking one pane of glass to serve as my framing device and just really letting that be the world in which I inhabit with my drawing. You can see that I've drawn a window on my sketchbook page, which is roughly the same proportions as the actual window pane itself. And I made Tom photograph me squinting because squinting is really a big part of how you go from, two-eyed vision to one-eyed vision where you're reducing it. So yes, it does look like I'm smelling something really stinky, but actually it's really like the process of squinting, closing one eye and looking with just the other eye to get those lines right. And so I've got my little drawing in the sketchbook, and then I'm going to prepare my materials for doing 2 or 3 paintings. And using acrylic medium, I use an acrylic matte medium, I'm going to coat 2 pages, 2 pieces of paper, and let them dry. One piece of paper is already painted. It's an old scrap from a previous project, and the other piece is a fresh piece of watercolor paper. Taping down the edges onto a drawing board so that I have something stable beneath the paper to work with and getting those lined up. And it's very beneficial to have several projects sort of lined up and ready to go because it takes a lot of the pressure off each and every one of those to be so perfect. And we want to really disarm that perfectionist in each of us. And now I'm refining those pieces of paper to make them the same dimensions as the actual drawing that I did. As opposed to the actual pane of glass, I'm using the drawing dimensions, and I measured out those proportions and marked those with tape, and that's what I would recommend for you as well. Your pane of glass might be more square, more wide, more tall, and whatever shape you drew, that's where you want to start from, because you're doing this exercise not from life, but rather from your drawing, your initial sketchbook drawing. So taking your vine charcoal, I'm going ahead and replicating, looking at my drawing, the lines and shapes, and getting the first surface prepared for doing a little painting. This is a little practice to take something from your sketchbook and work from it as a painting motif. And the whole point of this is to take what you see out your window and learn about it as a subject to use for your creativity, and then to simplify so that it's a place to start from where you're not getting lost in the details of, let's say, all the leaves on the tree, but rather just trying to get those mountain shape edges, the strong and important lines, like that slash of the power cord that connects to the top of the speaker, which I see out of my window. This is a really whimsical kind of an object that I see. I've never attempted to paint it in this way, so it's got an interesting perspective. And I've given myself 2 methods of seeing it, drawing it with charcoal and then drawing it with thinned paint, and setting those aside to dry. I'm preparing my palette. I'm working with oil paints. You might be working with oil paints or acrylics. And I'm giving myself a very basic palette that goes from white to yellows to reds to blues and burnt umber, and each of those yellows and blues and reds is either cool or warm. We'll talk about that more in a later assignment. And what I do with my palette knife is I prepare some mixes to create a sky color, the color of the distant hills, foreground hills, and I'm tipping in just a little bit of each color to the mix to see how close I'm getting to what I was observing earlier. And that's a really trial and error The more you do it, the better you get at it. So I find for myself that it always takes several practice paintings before I feel like I've really nailed my understanding of what I'm seeing. And then I'm just going to very broadly go in and paint each of these puzzle pieces. We have, quite a complex scene here with 5 different mountain ridges going forward to backward, and each mountain ridge, as it goes further away, from my vantage point, becomes slightly fainter and grayer. In the foreground, it'll be rather green, and in the distance, it will be rather blue, sort of a blue-gray or a lavender gray, and progressively, as these mountain ridges come closer to me, they become more chromatic. They have more color. So after looking at my drawing and replicating that, I definitely had to go back and take a look at nature to refresh my memory of what I had been looking at. And since it's right out your window, you can do that as well. You can go take a look at where the origin of your sketch came from, and then make color notes on your drawing. You can write, as you're doing your drawing, little sidebars that say, light blue sky, gray blue mountain, purpley brown tree trunk, bright yellow, dingy ochre, what have you, and make little notes on the margins of your journal or your sketchbook, so that when you go back into a space where you're just painting without access to actually seeing, you have information. And you're creating a rather generalized puzzle shape. I mean, imagine each of these pieces is out of cutout paper, or like a wooden jigsaw puzzle that you might have played with children. And then you're just coloring them in. And they're not terribly nuanced. They're yellow, blue, green, purple, and so on and so forth, approximating with your color mixing the colors that you're actually seeing in reality as best you can. But this is an exercise where you want to take your time, but you don't want to spend all day doing it. You want to look and observe and make decisions and then go for it. And the reality is you're probably going to miss the mark at least once or twice along the way, because it's the first time you're doing it, so you're jumping in. And that's why we have a second one. In the second version, what I'm having you do is you're working on a colored ground, a colored piece of paper, and you're working with a much more simplified color palette. Here I'm just mixing colors that turn me on, that get me excited. So I'm generalizing with lavenders and blues and greens, and it's arbitrary. It's what I want to play with my palette today. Your palette is not just the surface that you mix your paints on, but it's also the colors that you work with. Some painters are famous for working with, a very, very limited palette, and you might find that you love working with primary colors or nuanced colors, or gray is your color, and you have a hard time getting into the higher chroma. So it's part of the process of discovering your own voice in terms of a painting, just playing with assignments like this, where you try something realistically, you try something that's more arbitrary and about your own color sensitivity, and then you try again.